You're listening to the myPET podcast, the show for pet lovers of Australia and around the world.
Hi, you're listening to the myPET podcast. My name's Aria, and as always, I am joined by chaser of chooks and our resident vet, Dr. Glenn.
Hello.
How you going?
I'm good.
That's good. How are your chickens going?
Good at the moment.
That's good.
Yep.
How many do you have?
18 at the moment.
Yeah. Are they
and one rooster.
free ranging?
They all confined to the very large chicken Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
Because of Mr. Fox.
Yeah, Mr. Fox is not good for chickens.
Yes.
The other thing that's not good for chickens is the heat.
Absolutely.
But before we get into that, just remember that this is just general advice. For advice specific to you and your chookies, have a chat to your vet.
Sounds good.
So chickens don't do well in the heat at all. So what is heat stroke in chickens? What classifies just a chook who's a little bit hot and bothered as to one who's got heat stroke?
Yeah, I mean, they have got some methods of cooling down. I mean, basically by panting and radiating heat a little bit, but it's mostly through panting is the main way they've got to cool down. Mm-hmm. They are not particularly efficient at it, and their panting needs to evaporate air across their airways, which they're not very efficient at compared to dogs. So, I mean, they're definitely prone to just heat as in just the temperature, but also humidity really buggers them up as well. So the more humid is, the less heat they can evaporate across their airways, so they don't do well with hot and humidity particularly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, how many times do you hear someone say, it's not the humidity, it's not the heat that gets me, it's the humidity.
And it is.
And it's, it's the case for chooks as well.
Yeah, so basically, chook's hot if it's panting. Open mouth breathing in a chicken is either respiratory tract infection disease or overheating. And if it's a hot day and it's open mouth breathing and it wasn't open mouth breathing this morning when it was cool, they're basically hot.
Yeah, okay.
So they pant, increase their respiratory rate, sort of stand with their wings out sometimes to just try and get the less feathered areas underneath their wings, I think, exposed to the air.
Yeah.
They sort of fluff their feathers up a little bit again just to try and get some airflow happening underneath their feathers. But that's, hot chook, they're just usually standing around not doing a lot, not eating, not scratching, not doing the normal active chicken things. They're just looking distressed and got their wings out and airways or heads extended sometimes. Their wattles and combs can be a bit pale sometimes, or a different colour to what they were a couple of hours ago, just because they're trying to radiate heat, I think, and their cardiovascular systems are sometimes in trouble.
So I'm guessing you don't mean like a hair comb and flowers?
No, not wattle flowers. And I mean, the comb looks a bit like a comb, I assume that's why it's called a comb. And it is on their head? Yep, so it's the bit down the middle that sticks up like a comb. And the wattles are their little jowly, floppy, dangly bits below their ears on their cheeks. And they probably radiate some heat from those, but not very effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are the risk factors, like what temperatures are starting to get into danger zone for the chickens?
I mean, definitely the high 20s. Anywhere in the 30s is potentially, bad. And low 30s on a humid day, chickens really, really suffer a lot.
Yeah.
So once they get in that cycle of overheating, as in they can't regulate their own body temperature very well, then they start getting, metabolic problems, organ system failure troubles, diarrhea troubles, because nothing's working properly. And if they get hot enough, muscle tremors and vesiculations and seizures and collapse and badness, basically. But anything, high 20s if it's really humid potentially, and depending on the chicken pen and where the chickens are, that could be the temperature on the news or the weather saying, okay, it's going to be 30 degrees today, but what's the temperature in the chicken pen? Is it in the shade? Is it up against a wall? Is there radiated heat from somewhere else? Is there not much airflow because it's got buildings around it or something else around it? Is there trees or shrubs beside the chicken run, but it's actually in the sun? If there's shade if you've got a chicken tractor sort of set up, how high is the roof of providing shade? Is that roof insulated? So there's lots of things to consider basically. But if the chickens on a hot enough day I mean, shade is obviously very important.
Yeah.
But if it's humid, you could still have a really, really shaded chook pen, and mine's under a massive tree which has got full leaves during summer, and it's really, really shaded in there. But on a hot day, they can still be wing extended and panting. It can be pretty hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the treatment for chooks who have got heat stroke?
If they've got hot, it's basically obviously cooling their body temperature as quickly as possible while maintaining their health. So never any water around their face, particularly if they're lacklustre or lethargic or not able to control their airways properly. But cool running water can bring their temperature down as soon as possible. If they've had an episode where they're weak, or they're having a seizure, or they're obviously unwell, a vet visit for artificial hydration and energy, and there's other medications to treat shock that your vet could administer. If you're got a pet chicken that you're happy to do that for. But definitely it can be life-threatening, and getting their temperature back to normal is the best way to go. But certainly seeking veterinary attention is their best chance of survival.
And even better is prevention in the first place. So you've talked a fair bit about shade, so that's obviously a really important factor. What other preventative measures can people take? I
mean, depends on your circumstances, but obviously inside in the air conditioning is a lot better than being out in 32 degrees and 100% humidity. So if you've got a suitable chicken area that you're happy to have your little one inside, that is obviously the best way to go. And that can be preemptive. If it's just going to be hot and humid, you can bring them inside. If
one of our vet nurses who does customer service for Vet and Pet is, I think she probably loves her chooks that much that they'd be. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is she? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she does. And speaking of her, if you have chooky questions, she's pretty knowledgeable, but she loves them in her babies.
Absolutely.
I can picture that happening at her house.
They got little personalities, but
they do.
I mean, certainly air conditioning helps. And then if it's not air conditioning, same as us, or it's more comfortable underneath the fan. So if you can get some air movement and fan to their outdoor enclosure, if that's an option. Cooling the environment. Okay, how can we do that? I wouldn't recommend wetting all of a enclosure because it takes away choice. And I mean, again, wetting is a bit of a two-edged sword, where if you've got lots of humidity, well, it's not going to make it any less humid. But if you've got the choice and it's in the shade, I mean, I often wet an area in the chook yard, and that tends to, through evaporation, even if it's high humidity, cool that area, and you'll see the chooks, they'll go and scruff around and dig in there and lie in the cool the cool moist soil basically. So that's one way to go. If you've got lower numbers, you can use cooling pads or frozen water bottles or frozen bricks, and put them in their environment where they can choose to be close to that or lie on top of it or lie beside it. So that can certainly help with cooling. I mean, if they're cool, you can mist the area and wet them down. But you probably, it depends on what day is. Like if it's a really stinking hot day with a hot wind blowing, it's probably not going to be as humid, and wetting the area and wetting the chickens, and they can get some cooling through evaporation. If it's just really, really still and there's no air movement, wetting the actual chicken without moving air isn't going to probably make them any cooler and might make it actually worse. But cooling the environment using water is one of the ways that it does it. The commercial facilities have got evaporative cooling fans as a rule, where they're blowing air through a filtration mechanism, then running water through, and that increases humidity. But because you've got forced air movement, you're getting some cooling effect from that. But again, they run into trouble on very humid, hot days, because that doesn't really work that well either.
When I had chickens, I was sort of living west of the Great Divide, up pretty high, so it didn't get hot very often. But I would freeze water bottles for them, and they loved it. They'd sort of sit on top of them, and wiggle around.
Absolutely.
And,
And, I mean, their water source, I mean, making sure that that's as cool as possible. Again, wouldn't give them a frozen water source, but I mean, cool water, just make sure it's not hot water. And, your little, if you're watering through little nipple deliverers, well, they're probably going to get fairly warm fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Electrolytes you can certainly give them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend replacing water with solely electrolytes because that might put them off drinking if it tastes different to what they used to. But 2 offerings of normal water and electrolytes, so they've got the choice. That makes sense, and that could potentially just you want to maximise their water intake because that can be cooling and hydration is very important because they're if they're panting, well, they're losing more moisture than they would normally.
Yeah. We have a few different electrolytes and some that are specifically for chooks, for poultry. They're good. I know that a crazy chook lady tells people to use those a lot.
Yeah.
I hear her talk about them a lot.
I'm not aware of a custom cooling vest for chickens as of yet. There's probably a very, very niche market out there for that. Cooling the environment and definitely the offering ice blocks and ice bricks and water bottles to snuggle up to and be close to, give them the option of that, and a lot of the time they'll choose to do that.
Yeah. What about like dietary modifications? Is there anything you can do feeding wise that helps them to stay a bit cooler?
Yeah, I mean, reducing their metabolic load makes sense. So if they are on a prepared diet, I mean, going toward temporarily like a more oilseed based diet could help. That's not necessarily the diet they should stay on full term, but increasing the fat portion of their diet means that they've got less carbohydrates, there's less metabolic energy that goes into digesting that. I mean, diet wise, you can give them frozen or cool watermelon or veggies that you would normally give them, fruits that are frozen. They can eat that, and there's some cooling that's be associated with that. So that'd be one thing in a pet flock that you could do to help cool them down as well.
So what, like when you say oil and seed, does that look like adding oil to their grain or doing a completely different thing, and what kind of things?
It's probably more so like sunflower seeds and linseeds and those sort of things. Like they could eat those and have a high energy component if they have got high energy requirement if they're laying heavily. That's one way to get energy into them, so they're not losing weight but without just filling up sort of just grain pellets that maybe increases their metabolic load.
And what about like mealworms and things like that? Would that be another thing to do?
I mean, they would be fine as well. I mean, they're high in protein and they're a good food source for them. So, I've got no troubles with that.
Yeah, cool. That's good to know. I didn't actually know that about chooks, so that's interesting. When I moved to the east of the Great Divide, where it was hot and humid, my chookies really struggled with it. So it was a bit of a challenge.
It's a big change, and they're just not designed for it. So it's controlling as many factors as you can, basically environment, cooling mechanisms, food to some extent, cool stuff if you can give it to them, like frozen foods. I mean, that's going to be fairly cooling for them.
Yeah, wonderful. Is there any other little tips or anything else you want to mention about it?
I think that's the main thing. Being mindful of it and being preemptive probably makes sense. Like, if it's going to be a really hot day, I mean, I'll be out there with a hose at 6 o'clock in the morning and just wet that, sort of third where it's going to be in the shade, but like to cool that whole area down, and you will definitely see that they'll hang out there more and they'll dig their little holes and they'll have body contact in the cool wet soil. Whereas it wasn't there, I think they certainly warm up faster. That's for sure.
I always had water bottles on rotate. So before I went to work, I'd put a stack of them out, and big ones stay frozen longer and that sort of thing.
But just being that little bit prepared can definitely make a big difference.
Because they're wonderful little things to have around. They're so great. I really miss having chookies. I might have to get more.
Even though they're little dinosaurs. But
they are little dinosaurs, but they're cute. Well, dinosaurs did have feathers, apparently.
Yes, just not very big ones.
That's another podcast. Although I don't know, are you qualified for dinosaurs? You did graduate a long time ago.
I'm old.
Yeah.
Beck says I'm really old.
You are. It's true.
That's right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing your chookie knowledge with us. I hope this helps you and your chookies to stay cool and have a happy summer. And thanks for watching and listening.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.